Hello everyone and welcome to the next part of the Q&A with Saif and me. I'm not sure what the number of the video this is, might be the 14th total Q&A. And today we will continue with the questions that you have asked on a lot of different platforms. We usually get questions via Discord or via the YouTube comments. So if you have anything that you want to know and that had not been asked before, feel free to put it in the comments below or give the question to us by any other way. Anyway, but without further ado, let us dive into the questions. And today we have some very interesting ones. And the very first one might be particularly interesting. It might even take a bit of time to answer it properly. And the question is, what is the nature of the cessation people talk about in reference to stream entry or nibbana? And this one is for Saif.
Yeah, so often the Buddha talks about cessation in regards to nibbana. He often talks about in terms of like, that place where there's no sun or moon, there's no five aggregates, there's no form, there's no coming and going. And it just seems like the sort of disappearance of everything. And same for stream entry, he often talks about in terms of like seeing the deathless. Then this has led to a lot of people to see nibbana or stream entry as this sort of, you have to have this experience of the disappearance of the five aggregates. Like everything just sort of ceases, this sort of blankness, even for a second. Maybe you take up a specific object that is nibbana, that is different from the five aggregates, or so on, or either it blinks out of existence completely, your experience. Whatever it is, it just sort of assumes that that place of nibbana that the Buddha's talking about is that there is just no five aggregates there. But you have to realize that when the Buddha talks about upadana, assumption, the self-view, in regards to the experience, he says that it's not part of the five aggregates. It's literally what he says. He says upadana is not part of the five aggregates, but it's not different from the five aggregates either. He said it's in regards to the five aggregates. But fundamentally, because it's not part of the five aggregates, there's no need for the five aggregates to cease in order to experience the cessation of upadana, the cessation of self, the cessation that the Buddha was talking about. So, and literally that's what one needs to do, is to figure out how can the five aggregates still be here, literally form, perception, intentions, consciousness, everything, but I am not there. And that's exactly what the cessation the Buddha is talking about is, and that's what stream entry is. And yeah, if you read the suttas, when the Buddha talks about this, he always says one thing, like the reason why there is existence, why there is being, why there is anything, it's because of craving. And that's like the most confusing thing. Sotapanna is like, how can my existence be due to my craving? Like my existence is due to my like matter, my biological being. Well, no, it's literally like the extent of craving, the extent of clinging. That's the extent of existence, extent of being. And yeah, when there's experience of cessation of craving, then that's when you realize it's cessation, disappearance. But that's what you need to realize, is that that's all that needs to be done is cessation of craving, not disappearance of like my experience going blank and so on. For stream entry, this is like specifically become a permanent thing. Like for example, you can be enter jhana, for example, and experience temporary cessation, because yeah, in jhana there's no craving. But it's not yet nibbana or stream entry. So the nature of the cessation for a stream entry is that he's understood dependent origination. He's understood that anything that he could experience is conditioned, dependent on a body or feeling or whatever. And so anything that I could possibly experience, everything that arises, is subject to cessation. And with that comes the abandoning of self-view, the ability to take up anything as mine. And yeah, that's exactly what the cessation is that you can't take it up as mine. because you've seen that it's conditioned. But you don't need to. You don't need the experience to disappear and for it to reboot. See that everything is conditioned. All you need to see is that, like, while it's enduring, it's just dependent on something. You need to be seeing the origin of your experience and not trying to wait for this blanking out to appear for you and give you the insight. You need to be right here, right now, developing, like, what is my experience conditioned by? What does it depend on? And yeah, the Buddha gave those clues, is that you need to analyze the body, for example. You just see it as like, yeah, it's made up of all these things that I have no control over, like nails, hairs, skin, muscles. It was born from mother and father that I had no control over. And yeah, doing that analysis and seeing your experience as dependent on that. Yeah, if you do that, you'll experience cessation of craving, cessation of taking up as mine. And yeah, that's really it. That's the main thing, is that the cessation the Buddha's talking about is just the cessation of craving, and that's really it.
Yeah. It might be useful to also think about it in terms of the chain of dependent origination. I mean, in the middle there's craving somewhere, and from craving there follows being, there follows self, there follows suffering. And when the craving is no longer there, then the being and the self and the suffering are also no longer there. It's a conditional statement, and that is also something that people tend to misinterpret all the time. They think in terms of binary. Either there is no self at all, never was, never will be, or there is self all the time, forever, or whatever. And the middle ground is kind of missing. And that is one of the main things that the Buddha introduced into the spirituality equation. And it's kind of also the genius of the Buddha, namely that it is a conditional statement. With craving, with upadana, with the wrong assumptions and everything, there is self. Without upadana, without the wrong assumptions, without ignorance and all of other things, there is no longer self. So it fades and it ceases. It's a cessation that Saif was kind of talking about. And then when there's no longer self, yeah. And one more thing, I think it is good to think about the entire topic in terms of upadana, the underlying assumptions or views, as fuel. And then there is something that is burning in dependence on that fuel. I think the Buddha used that simile also quite often when he explained how the self, for example, can exist in regards to the five aggregates, but not as the five aggregates and not fully a part of the five aggregates. Yeah, so craving and all the sensuality that you engage in is the fuel that keeps the self-view alive. And as long as you provide your entire being with fuel, it will remain there. And when you cut off the source of the fuel, namely the underlying assumption, the upadana, the self-view, then it cannot remain burning for a very long time. No? Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, it's the hard thing is obviously that one needs to just experience that for themselves, because, like, before you've seen the cessation of craving for yourself, it's going to always be, like, intellectually a bit wayward to think of, like, your existence as determined by the extent of your sensuality. That's like that's a very special idea to the Buddha. That's obviously not going to be necessarily amenable to, especially, like, modern conceptions of where our existence is based. But yeah, if you practice develop the concentration, as the Buddha says, like, a concentrated monk naturally sees the disappearance of the five aggregates, which is the cessation of craving, as he says, quite literally. Yeah, there's no craving, there is no me. That's the end of being. But that needs to be experienced. Otherwise, it's a bit strange.
And that's kind of also why it requires faith. So nobody can give you the experience of the cessation of self. Either you experience it or you don't. And until then, you have to go by faith that it is worth it, that it is a good thing, that it's the most sublime thing, and all the other things that the Buddha was talking about. It is, but you have no way of checking that. So you kind of have to go through the training, and then you will have the confirmation at some point for yourself. And concerning the modern views of being, of what my experience depends upon, That is a very good example of the wrong views that keep you shackled, because you completely, or most people completely misunderstand what their being even is, what they even are. So they, at least in the modern times, think that they are the body. To some extent, they are the physicality of their being. And as long as you hold that view, there's not much room for spiritual development, as that view is fueling the entire process of re-becoming and everything that the Buddha was talking about. It's not the entire thing, but it's a good exemplification, maybe. Yeah. Was it sufficient for that question?
I guess one other thing one could say is that the way we're talking about it is a way that can be like, even though we're saying that you need faith, it is a way that can be like very immediately developed compared to like the way some people talk about cessation. Because the way some people talk about it, it's just something that happens to you. You can't really like develop it immediately. You just go do the things, keep doing them, and at some point it will just, cessation will just happen to you. Like the 16 stages of insight, for example, is things that, you know, you're not going through them like consciously. You're doing certain things and then they happen to you. Like some event arising, pass away an event, and then the fruition event. And yeah, you can't really know when it's going to happen. But the way we're talking about it, at the very least, even though if you need a certain level of faith, like if you just practice like sense restraint and restraint from distraction and so on, like you will start to see it for yourself pretty immediately. Even like when you like on existential level, when the Buddha says that like, yeah, a being is to the extent that there is craving. Like, yeah, if you stop craving for a bit and you start to get anxious, that's exactly why, because it feels like dying. Like, that's why, like Ajahn Chah said, like it's dying before you die and so on. And yeah, you get experiential insight into that immediately. Like, you just tighten your sense restraint, don't give into it for a while, and it does feel like you're dying, and that's why like, the mind always reverts back to it, because like I don't, you know, it's painful. Yeah, it's very immediate, even if it needs a certain level of faith, and you could do it much more consciously.
I guess the important part is, I think many people tend to misunderstand the having an experience handed to you, as an example. That kind of fruition event is not something that you can control by any means, really. It's just really something that happens or it does not happen, and people nowadays consider themselves lucky if it does happen to them, and they give those things or events all kinds of meaning. But the training that the Buddha talked about is always something that you do through your own effort, through your own, to some degree, even craving, to actually make it happen. It is a result, a product of whatever you are doing, and it can never happen if you don't do that. Well, that work, really. It's not accidental. It is very much, very targeted, very intentional. You move willingly in that direction, following the instructions of another. But yeah, it's not random. And many books nowadays even call insights an accident, as an example. And whenever you hear or read something like that, there should be a very big red flag blinking up, because that person who calls it an accident has very, very likely very limited understanding of the Dhamma, because it is not. It's absolutely not an accident.
It's like any form of understanding. Like if you want to learn maths, you can't just like, you know, do random symbols on the paper and then somehow the knowledge will appear to you. It's just, yeah, you have to develop the clarity of it. Like keep developing insight into the nature of the body very consciously, developing clarity, and yeah, then the nature of things will become apparent to you because you put the effort into making it apparent. Yeah.
It sounds so simple, and in a sense it is, but in another sense it is the most difficult thing to see, because barely anyone can see it. It's difficult, hard to see, especially by a generation that is engaged heavily in clinging and sensuality and all these things. It's a very statement that the Buddha gave directly after his awakening. Why he wasn't very inclined to teach, because even his generation was already swamped by sensuality, let alone ours. that has everything that they could ever wish for available at the click of a button. Imagine such people and how hard they are to teach. It's kind of miraculous that there are still people making a breakthrough to the Dhamma nowadays. But it is possible. So I still want to encourage you in that regard. So make the effort, do the work, and then you can get the fruit of it all. Yeah. Anything else?
If you do the right things, it'll have to happen. That's what the Buddha literally says. Yeah.
There's no other way. If you do the right things and it is not happening, then you can be absolutely certain that you have not been doing the right things. Yeah. Okay. That was a very long answer, but I think it is necessary because it is a very important topic. Anyway, let us move to the next one and see what other people want to know. And the next question is as follows. Could you please discuss the scanning meditations, and if it was discussed at all by the Buddha, and what benefit it may have? Can it lead to insight? Thank you. And I think that is my question now. Yeah, the scanning meditations is referring to all the kind of body scanning meditations. I think the most popular one might be the Goenka tradition, where people are practicing a specific way, where they take about a coin-sized area of attention, start somewhere at the head, and then they scan the entire body with this coin-sized, well, flashlight, so to speak, and then try to notice and know all the different areas of their body, pretty much. I think Ayakema also has developed her kind of body scanning technique, and she teaches it to very, very beginners in meditation as a means to, well, allow them to learn more about their own bodies, because they have never approached their own bodies with their attention, so to speak. And in that regard, it can have some merit, as far as I understand it. However, as a complete meditation where people do nothing but that, then I think we can run into trouble. Because again, the nature of reality, the Dhamma, lies not in the sensations themselves. It is not in the central objects, and it's not in what is right in front of you. It is very much in the background, like we said in so many other questions and answers that we have given you. And that kind of body scanning is at best something that can also be happening while you generate some insight. So for some people, it is happening on its own and they generate some insight, but it's not really due to the method. It is in that context despite of the method, as far as I understand it. Some people can gain clarity even while doing that, because it's not about what you are doing, it's about what you are not doing, namely not acting out of greed, aversion, and distraction. And what else is going on can be quite different from person to person. Would I advise to practice such meditation? No, I don't think that's very beneficial, because it's easy to misattribute whatever success you had to such a method, and then you repeat it all over for your entire life, maybe for years of meditation, and get nothing in return. No improvements whatsoever. And that would be a very sad thing. So I would very much advise you to rather do what is in the sutras, focus on restraint, on enduring that painful craving that results from that restraint, and then at some point calm has to arise if you also endure distraction and whatever. No? Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I guess it's the same for any like specific meditation technique, is that it can have certain benefit, relative benefit at some point, but you don't want to misattribute it to that and then just keep doing it forever. Because at some point the benefit will run out and you'll attribute the wrong things to it. And the right things is always going to be like the entire gradual training, which is what you laid out basically, is including all the restraint and all the other things basically. There was one other type of scanning meditation the Buddha offered, but it's not really like at the same level of the sort of cycling through the sensations of the body. It was more the level of like developing clarity and insight. It was literally just reviewing the nature of the body as something that's unknowable. Like it's made up of these hairs, skin, nails, muscles, blood, and these are things that are like basically not thought about. They're always just in the background very vaguely for our normal experience, but the more you develop clarity into the body being made up of all these impersonal elements, and develop clarity into that and keep that as your context for your entire life, basically, you will develop dispassion through that. That type of scanning can be a useful element in your practice alongside the restraint and other things and so on. But even then, it's like you kind of do the scanning meditation a few times, but you don't have to keep reviewing the body again and again. Once you've developed some clarity into it, you can just tap into it immediately. Just tap into the fact that the body is unownable, and you don't have to keep going through all these different things. So even then, it's so you do it a few times until you develop clarity. You don't keep doing it again and again. Yeah, that's one type of scanning meditation the body offered in the sutras.
Yeah. I think Ajahn Chah gave a nice simile when it comes to the topic. He said, imagine there is a person with a basket full of fruits. A person who does not know what is in the basket has to repeatedly take out everything out of the basket, do a counting of the fruits that are in there, and then put it back in the basket. And when that person is doubtful, they have to go through the process again and again and again. Check every time, are all my fruits there? But if you have developed understanding and insight into that basket of fruit in that case, then you don't have to take all the fruit out again. It is just there for you. You just know. And in the same way, if you have understood the nature of experience, then you don't have to count anymore. You don't have to go through the motions. It's just there. And it cannot be taken away. You have just understood it. Yeah. That's a useful way of thinking it.
It's sometimes, like in the sutras, it's hard to talk about because, like, for different places in the practice. So at the beginning, everyone needs to be developing like that that level of diversified clarification in terms of doing scanning and look into different aspects of your experience. But for example, sometimes when he talks about like the Sotapanna, and he says like all a Sotapanna has to do is just develop recollection of the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, and he gains a sense of goal of the path. Then joy rises, then tranquility rises, and then everything becomes manifest for them. And literally, that's all they have to do. But unless you're a Sotapanna, you need to be developing all the other things, develop clarity of the body and into the feelings and so on. And yeah, but like Flau says, once it's developed, you just sort of tap into it like that fruit basket. You kind of know everything that's in there automatically.
Yeah. Well, the practice tends to be kind of different when you have attained the right view compared to before. And even immediately after, there's not the whole body of knowledge and everything available to every single Sotapanna. That's not the case. The Sotapanna literally understands dependent origination, not even in all links or anything like that. Well, some do. Some people who are inclined to teach, who are good at explaining, who have a very rich intellect, as an example, they can do that. But technically, there are people who practice based on faith. So you just need to know one of the links of dependent origination that have been laid out by the Buddha, and that's enough. That can get you all the way to Arahantship. Not much more is necessary. You understand that Namarupa depends on Vijnana, as in everything, your physicality of your experience plus the subjective part depends on consciousness, and consciousness could not be there without the other things. And you're pretty much free when you have also gotten rid of craving. But yeah. And maybe one more remark. When the Buddha talks about the entire practice, he approaches it in very different ways. He sometimes talks about feelings, he sometimes talks about intentions, sometimes about virtue, sometimes about the body, sometimes about kasinas, and sometimes about a whole lot of other things, like contemplations of dead bodies and things like that. It's all the same, or it all has the same destination. That is very important to keep in mind. It's just different ways of approaching the same topic, namely that your entire experience is not your own. It always depends on something, and it does not matter what it is, that is outside of the domain of your control. And once you realize that, then the breakthrough to the Dhamma is kind of inevitable, given that you have done the prior work of weakening craving and everything. Yeah. Anything else you want to add?
No, so I think we answered enough of that question.
Okay. Okay, then let us move to the next one. And the next person wants to know, how does feeling or emotion change beyond stream entry? And this one is for you.
I mean, the main thing is that for a stream enterer who is abundant self-view, they don't really experience the feeling anymore in the same way, at least. Any feeling that's going to emerge is going to be done with a certain amount of distance. And the more that's developed beyond stream entry is just basically developing that further and further and further until it's completely, the feeling is just there on its own. Like in the Baha'i Sutras, like, you know, in the scene, let there just be the scene. In the feeling, let there just be the felt. And that's basically it. And that includes like all of the non-craving in regards to it. So especially when that's developed, like feeling just sort of ceases altogether. In the sense that it's still there, aggregate feeling is still there, but it's not being felt by you, and to that extent it feels like it ceased. That's why Sariputta said that like the pleasantness of unbinding is that nothing is felt. Not in the sense that there's no feeling there, or in the sense that it's not contacting you, because there's no craving, no clinging in regards to it. And yeah, that's the main thing. That's how feeling changes beyond stream entry. Is the fundamental division between feeling is there, yeah, I do not feel it because there is no craving. And that's precisely what a non-Sotapanna cannot understand really. It's how presence of feeling can be there, but I don't feel it. For non-Sotapanna, there is feeling there. It always means that I'm feeling it. And the only way he can think of freedom from feeling is either through pleasant feeling, seeking that out, or just imagining like there's no feeling there at all. But for a stream enterer, no, the feeling is there, but I don't feel it because there's no craving there. That's the cessation of feeling that the Buddha talks about. Yeah.
I think there is a sutta that is talking about the two kinds of arrows that a person is hit by, as an example. And the Buddha also explains the different kinds of feelings and how the noble disciple and the uninstructed worldling feels those feelings. And he always says that the noble disciple, the person who has at least attained the right view, feels the feeling detached. That is a distinguishing characteristic. There's always a distance between you and the feeling. So the person who is uninstructed and still has no idea about Dhamma, they always, for them, feeling always takes center stage. When there is a bad feeling, that is all that matters in their experience, so to speak. And when there is a good feeling, that is also what really matters in their experience. It is always right in the middle, right in the center, the most important thing. And yeah, that changes. From the center stage element, it moves way into the background until it's... You couldn't even call it the same thing as before. It's something different, more or less. Yeah, that's the difference. Emotions and feelings kind of vanish, but in a good way. Because at least I have many people heard saying that they find that kind of scary because it's unknown, never happened to them before, and everything that is unknown usually is a bit scary. Yeah. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, it's usually like scary because, again, I think about in those annihilationist terms, in terms of like there is like the disappearance of the feeling means that it's like the experience is blank. It's not about the experience being blank. It's about being not affected by it. The feeling is still there. Like an arahant still feels like pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. It's just that the relationship with it changes. It can be a bit confusing because the Buddha often talks about cessation of feeling and so on, and it's true because it's very different compared to how it used to be. before stream entry, and it feels like almost like it's completely different. Like the old feeling is seized, but it is the same feeling aggregate, just without the clinging and wrong views. And in some senses, even you could even say that like the Arahant is the only one that really experiences feeling truly, because the normal experience is always about trying to escape it. That's what craving is. Whenever pleasant is there, you want more of it. Whenever neutral is there, you want more of it. Whenever unpleasant is there, you don't try to not feel it, try to feel pleasant. So like if you have this perspective, you realize that the normal Patujana experience is trying to avoid the feeling, whereas the Arahant's experience is feeling it fully because they don't try to get away from it. And that's why they're unaffected by it, because they don't try to get away from it. It's fine. Like, feel unpleasant, it's okay. And yeah, because it feels okay, the old sense of feeling where you're trying to get away from it, it feels like, oh, that's completely seized. But now you feel it fully. So it depends on the sort of perspective you take upon it. But the annihilationist view is always going to be sort of tainted by your own clinging, which is, and that's why it seems like really scary. But no, it doesn't disappear. It's just your relationship changes with it.
Yeah, perfect. I think that's plenty on that question. Let us move to the next one, probably the last one for today. And this question is, does creativity suffer from a quieter mind? And I think it's my question, but I could simply say no, it does not. And the longer answer would be that most of the time the problem that people who have to work in a creative sense have is not that they have too little going on in their minds, is that the mind is crowded with all kinds of things, namely with craving. And when there is a lot of craving, then you cannot really work on any given task. You're not free to be inspired, so to speak. You will not recognize opportunities when they present themselves, simply because you are distracted. When a lot of that craving, a lot of that crowdedness is gone, if anything, you are more creative than before. So that's at least my take on it. It will be a different kind of creativity. You will very likely not, I don't know, at least most practitioners will not create all kinds of, I don't know, techno music. At least it's not their job and they have to do it for their family or something like that. But even then they will likely find a different source of income. But overall creativity, like coming up with something new, creating content for others, like creating those talks here with Saif. We never practice any of this, by the way. This is a spontaneous conversation between the two of us. And that is also a kind of creativity, because it is created on the fly. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, the Buddha literally talks about like when someone understands Dhamma, there is like infinite amount of phrases you can come up with. And the Buddha in the sutras often talks about like coming up with certain phrases spontaneously. And so, yeah, it's just like the mind is still very creative. It's in fact more creative in some senses because there's nothing blocking it. And the mind has become also, when you have a more profound understanding of things, then you're able to understand it in several different ways and come up with different terms and so on. But yeah, like there's also a flop side is that, you know, a Dhamma practitioner is probably not going to be making techno music and so on. So I guess there's that sort of creativity which will have to diminish, because yeah, there's like certain traditions like romanticism or so on which exalt like really intense experiences of emotion and these sorts of things, or like you have futurism which exalts like speed and chaos and so on. These sorts of things will probably have to will definitely have to suffer from a quieter mind. You can only sort of create those sort of things if your mind itself is chaotic. So a lot of artistic creativity might diminish. There might be a certain level of you might see a certain level of pointlessness in a lot of artistic creativity, simply because a lot of creativity is in the direction of merely stimulating the senses or just getting an emotional reaction. And if you value quiet mind, if you value mind without craving, then you're not going to find that valuable. That doesn't necessarily mean that artistic creativity is gone altogether. I mean, even in the sutras, there's a long tradition of like verse, for example, which is obviously, yeah, it's artistic, but it's much more purposeful. You wouldn't create there wouldn't be artistic creativity for the purposes of stimulation of the senses. It would be in regards to either, like, for example, in Tirigata, like remembrance of the good qualities of Arahants and the Sangha and so on, and the Buddha and Dhamma, or in terms of like having a sort of intellectual point of some sort of level of discernment that it's inducing. It's not going to be just creating techno music to dance to and so on. But yeah, there is a long tradition of hermit poetry, and even the like Zen tradition, there's like some level of art. But yeah, it's very different.
And in some cases, a poem is even easier to remember, which is also something that can be beneficial, especially when it comes to verbal traditions of transmitting certain teachings to your pupils. Yeah, anyway, I think that's plenty on that question. So in summary, you will be creative even more than before, but not the same kind of creativity. But yeah, I think we don't have time for another question, so I think we call it a day for now. So again, thank you very much for listening. If you have additional questions, feel free to put them down below or let us know by any other way. And apart from that, thank you very much for listening, and until next time, goodbye.